Okay.
Thank you, John.
Very
All
well.
right, lead it off.
All right. Plan stage weekly meeting. What date is it? 30th of September, 2020. The first item. Yeah, so like this MR came up. I've been turning it over in my head for a couple of weeks, and I wanted to talk about it in the meeting here while we have a few different like stable counterparts here because, I mean, like we should be doing this anyway. So the MR encourages engineers to prefer vertical feature slices over horizontal slices. Luckily, we have lots of examples that we're currently working on where we've done both. But yeah, I had some concerns about it originally. Like the idea in XP, I suppose, is that feedback loops, when you're programming, the length of the feedback loop is really important to reducing cycle time. And so in extreme programming, you kind of reduce that to zero practically by pairing all the time. And I was worried that this would actually increase feedback loop times because like, if there's a fundamental change that needs to be made, you have to go right back to the beginning when the code review comes in. On the other hand, like I think it's a pretty good forcing function to like radically think about how we iterate. And so I have two examples, right? Typically what we would do is take a feature that's coming up like epic assignees. It's very, very hard to think about how we could do that any more atomically than simply apply assignees to epics. You break it down to the level of maybe we could ship it as a GraphQL backend feature first, and then people can automate assigning and whatnot. But it's very hard after that to do anything but slice it horizontally. On the other hand, like maybe we should be asking ourselves, like, what would we build if we couldn't write any code at all? And then what's the absolute minimum we could do? So another example I thought of was quality management, which we have at the minute. We're producing a new issue type for test cases. Usually we'll be able to select that issue type, view a list of test cases and so on. But maybe if we couldn't write any code at all, what would be the thing we would do in that case? And I would imagine that we would produce some kind of issue template that automatically applied a label test case. Now we get all the functionality, albeit with some downsides, but you would be able to view test cases as regular issues and so on. And so you might say like, well, if we could just write one piece of code, how would we iterate from that? And I don't know what the answer is, but maybe, a select that automatically, you can select test case and it automatically applies that label. So we're still using, you know what I mean? We're reusing things that we already have in the first iteration, and that could be done extremely quickly. So those are the two examples I kind of thought of. I was wondering though, like that requires us to, in my opinion, change the way that we either where in the workflow we do iteration, or just simply change the way we approach things when we break them down. Because I think we tend to get to the smallest vertical feature slice, and then immediately we just horizontally slice it. And maybe we need to be more radical about what the smallest feature slice actually is and ask questions like that. What would we write if we couldn't write any code at all? And then take the next step up from that. So yeah, that's my whole TED talk basically. I was kind of interested to see what other people thought of this MR, what you think of that kind of approach to iteration, and how does it fit with UX, where you might you do all the customer research, you design the feature, and then somebody comes in and says, hey, maybe as a first iteration, we do this complete other thing. What's that experience like?
I think it's like, what is that complete other thing, right? And does it lead towards the larger vision of what we had in mind? And if you already kind of like, I think what Gabe and I are saying here is if you kind of understand the flow and the edge cases, that doesn't necessarily mean anything is designed out. It's just like you kind of understand how you want this to go. You understand the edge cases, you understand where there could be pitfalls for the user, right? So if it's a step towards that happy path, even if it's really, really small, that's okay. Because then like a designer like me might understand my small step, right? And maybe to John or Donald, that's not quite the smallest step. But if it's getting towards that, that's fine. I think if it's completely in a different direction, maybe that's where we'd want to talk a little bit more. I think you and I, John, even with epic assignees, there was an example in there where, you know, we didn't have to do anything. There was just like a little code element that you had there that there's nothing in the UI. It was just a quick action or something like that, and that's fine. So yeah, and I think maybe it's about planning a little earlier. So we already kind of do this, but maybe it's we all ideate on a problem before as like first step, get a little bit better about that. I know Gabe, you wrote a bunch here. What are you thinking?
I kind of just said, like using iterations as an example, Holly and I worked on some UX and thinking through like the bigger vision for things. But then when we thought about implementing it to make it easy, we broke it down into like specific user actions, like each click or each thing that they would see in very small things. So that way, if the engineers wanted, they could open up an MR, like a vertical MR for each thing, even though it wasn't technically complete and the user couldn't use iterations the entire way. It still was like one step in the user path, like the critical path or whatever you call it. And I found that was sort of helpful too. And I think along the same lines, my next point was at my last company, we worked on this rapid prototyping process called UX triage. And one of the things that was interesting and like kind of, I'll just share my screen real quick and how we sort of approached that was instead of like even working on wireframes or anything like that, we started by almost like mapping out the user journey. So like, for example, a sign up flow, right? You have you can either submit a valid login, you can submit invalid. What happens, like what does the user see and what do they do whenever that happens or whenever they forget their password, and kind of mapping out, but basically like the critical path the user takes to accomplish the thing of logging in, and where they go when it is valid. And so without getting into designing what the thing looks like, you can start to have a conversation with engineers and UX and product about, okay, well, what are the fields that would be on the login form that are valid? So you can start talking about data and some of those things. And then you layer on sort of like, we use atomic design or atomic UX. You can start layering on different components. And it's almost like lets the back end and the front end work in parallel, and also allows the UX to work in parallel on like improving what the actual UX will be and what the interface looks like. So it was an interesting thing that we found really effective because it shifted left the conversation about what the flow was, so that everyone had a shared understanding without getting into the weeds of talking about details of like, you know, layout and that sort of thing.
Does that make sense, John? What do you, or Donald, go ahead.
Yes, I think that does make sense. I was just going to link to something similar to what Gabe was talking about in user story mapping, which I think is similar to the early planning session that Mike led that he brought from Pivotal. I forget what it was called. But yeah, just having some process like that beforehand, I think is super helpful. To answer John's question that he had in there around, yeah, inception, there you go. But on like when we should, because I definitely agree that it would be good for us to go in like as we're planning a large feature and think a little bit more thoroughly on how we can iterate at different levels. I think where we've struggled is with our asynchronous nature. Like it's hard to get everyone's ideas on the different iterations that we can have when we're doing it asynchronously. So maybe if we could use this meeting to do something like Sid does with iteration office hours, because from those I've gotten a lot of value, and I think the people that have proposed iteration ideas in that office hours have found value in that. So if we did something similar to that, either in a separate meeting or in this meeting, I think that would be helpful. I don't know what you all think.
Yeah, like actually I find a lot of value in those as well. And also the iteration training that we did maybe 6 months ago. The videos that came with that were quite interesting. I find really useful. And it's actually quite liberating as well, like, because you realize that at that point you're free to make these decisions. Like, Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong, right? But if you look at where we ended up with test cases, is that in the first iteration, you'll be able to create a test case, list test cases, and view them, right? And you get like 90% of the way there using labels and issue templates, right? You have some weird quirks where, okay, it's still an issue, so it'll still appear in the issue list, but that issue list can be filtered by this test case label. So you are giving the user the ability to see a list of test cases. Next iteration, you could put that in the sidebar and automatically direct them to a list that's pre-filtered. And so you're really building very, very little. The question is, I guess, like, did we know that when we started this? You know, like, we kind of iterated to the point where this was the first iteration, right? That this, we decided what we were going to deliver, and it has been successful. Like, I mean, it's not like test cases in particular a problem. It's just a really good example because it's a completely fresh, brand new thing. The last thing that I'd have some concern about, or maybe I don't actually have any concern about, but some other people might, is that you are going to have some duplication of effort, like, without a doubt. You know, you might have to design an interim state as we go through this iteration, or we might have to, like, you know, if we did that example with test cases where we reused issues initially, at some point we'd have to do a migration to move all of those to the new class that we create. So you are creating like more work, but on the other hand, you're getting the features of the customer earlier. So it's a trade-off.
Well, it's hard because some of these features, like test cases, is a great example. And thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, no, I completely agree. We iterated back to a very simplistic situation. The difficulty is the feature only is really appealing to regulated industries who have to be very, very rigid with their structure. So again, you have to kind of understand your buyer as well. In this case, having an issue and then telling them they're going to have to migrate all their stuff across breaks the regulated model. So it's harder for those types of customers to swallow some of these changes than it would be for other customers. So you kind of have to try to balance customer need versus features and rolling them out. I do agree, though. I think we ended up, I was actually really proud of the team for how they iterated on that. And I'm not sure if it would have been, if there's a better way to kind of get to where we got, but I think in the end we got there, which is really encouraging. So, but I do agree. It's a great example.
I also think with test cases, it's interesting, just because I was talking with a customer and they gave me a list of all the different issue types they use in Jira, and test cases are like one of those. And so, and then I also came across another customer who generates test cases as issues so that they can like watch a release on a board and like double check that everything's there. So like, I don't know, like it's sort of where we could iterate to like, you know, distinct classes for everything, or we can look at things and being like, what are the jobs to be done and how can we iterate on issues themselves to make them more extensible to support these different use cases, you know, because we don't really know all of the ways that the customers use everything. And that's at least what I've learned, is that there's so many weird things that customers do with issues and boards that have very little to do with planning. So, which tells me that they've gotten creative about solving their problems with the things that already do exist. And so how can we like build on top of that in small ways? I don't know, but
You could do a lot of those workarounds for lacking a feature. They're finding a creative workaround. How can we incorporate those creative workarounds into an officially supported way to help new customers so they don't have to go through the growing pains of finding those workarounds? I think there's an opportunity there to learn a lot. And that's why the customer interviews are so critical, because we do learn a ton when you talk to people about how they're using things. Because I had a similar situation where somebody was talking about using issues for test cases, but they said they couldn't do that because every issue they opened up triggered a project manager to come and understand where funding came from, because every issue is tied to funding. So opening a bunch of issues for test cases didn't work for them because it didn't fit their basically their funding models. So, but again, they wanted to. So it's kind of this weird, you know, people are doing all sorts of things that we don't really realize behind the scenes.
Well, that's also where we should talk about, because it's not just for test cases. Every company, larger company I've talked to, wants to tie budget back to issues and merge requests, right? So you can have one project where like it's like an inner source thing where you have a ton of different teams working on it, but things have to get like budgeted and allocated somewhere and somehow and tied back to it. And that's sort of where that's like a universal job to be done. That's not just test cases, which like, how do we solve that job to be done of tying an object back to some sort of cost center, right? And the way that that's solved in a lot of other tools is, you know, a custom field.
Well,
So
for people unfamiliar, if you do a government contract, you must tie every piece of work to the cost center. That is a stipulation of winning a government contract. So they have to be able to say that this MR was done under what cost center or what billing code. And that's a US government restriction, and they're the biggest purchaser of software in the United States. So it's something that a lot of these companies are running into. And I don't know how it works in other government agencies, but that's where a lot of this is coming from. Please, they have one government contract and it's driving an entire change to their workflow because that's where they make a lot of their money. So yeah, it is a difficult situation.
Gabe, you mentioned there, like, could we assign a DRI from each function? We kind of do that. That's the thing. So I wonder if it's like if it's a question we need to ask as part of the breakdown, as part of the iteration when the DRI is assigned. Like, what's the minimum you would do? I wonder if an engineer, like, or a UX or whoever, like, coming to an issue is asking like the same question, you know, or if it's that the PM understands the customer need, but that we don't, and that the customer need might be, you know, in the case of test cases, like to be able to programmatically work with test cases, and we could fulfill that need without building too much, but the engineer needs to understand that to suggest an iteration on that basis. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, I think that that's part of it, and I also think part of it just goes back to how we built the product this far and thinking about solving like a customer need with a specific thing, right? So the first thought is we need test cases. Let's build test cases. The first thought with epics, we need epics, so let's build epics is an object. And the reason why I think we decided to do epics was because they were going to be different and that they were a collection of many things and they could be nested in one another. But as we're finding out, there's like other issue type things that also need to be nested in the same hierarchical way, like requirements. And so it's almost like instead of shifting a mindset, instead of creating a new thing, how can you build a widget, for example, that lets you have that sort of relationship and holds that relationship, which we could put in a paid tier, you know, instead of creating an entirely new thing. So I'm not sure why. I think async does make it hard. But especially as we're like kind of constrained for budget and resources moving forward as a team, I think it's paramount that we start to think about the smallest change using what we have. And I think that sort of constraint will be really valuable because it'll lead to more innovative solutions in the long run, I think.
I mean, I like the idea of everyone ideating on what's the smallest change or like what's the smallest solution. Not that we have to go that way, but just having that in mind, especially as I design from y'all's perspective, would be awesome. So like, if we have the job, the user story, we've broken them down into small stories within the issues, and then we ideate on those. I think that could make sense and capture that within the issue, and that's like first step. What do y'all think, PMs?
Yeah, I mean, I like to collaborate. So however we can do that more effectively, I will support that.
Completely agree.
Alexis, do you want to verbalize that last one?
Yeah, so back to the MR, which seems to have more of be focused on the MRs and on developers or engineers. So I was just wondering, like, well, it's not merged yet, but it seems to be going that way. So I was wondering, are we going to go with the path of having both front end and back end on the same MR, sort of to provide that visibility and context for the reviewers, or how is that going to, or is it a decision to make per team? Is it something that we're going to kind of incorporate company-wide? Yeah.
Sorry, I misread your name. I thought it was Alexis who wrote that point. Yeah, so that's a good question, and everyone's still discussing it, right? I'd prefer not to see that. I'd prefer that we went down the route where we simply come up with iterations that required fewer disciplines to be involved in the changes, because I think once you introduce more levels to the review process, and you couple things more, things slow down. That's my opinion. Others may disagree, but also, like, Sid made this comment about like the minimum change is the one that requires a documentation update, which like so you could, like, in that context, like if you add something to the GraphQL API that allows a user to do something that they didn't do before or they couldn't do before, that's something that requires a docs update. That's something that you deliver to a customer, and that's something that would be backend only. On the other hand, like if we were to think even more radically about it, and you were to say, we can deliver this feature, the customer can do this thing, if we could just speed up this one endpoint, the customer could repurpose it for X feature, but they can't at the minute because it's too slow. And that result is that you do a database improvement. Like that to me is a perfectly fine thing, like at the minute you go to a new issue and you type in the title of the issue, and as you type along, it suggests new issues to you. And like last year that didn't work because the suggestion took 5 or 10 seconds and it simply timed out. So that feature didn't work at all. I think it was Felipe who sped up that feature, and that feature, like that endpoint, could now possibly be used to suggest issues in any context in real time. And so simply by speeding up that feature, you could provide that as a feature to a customer in different contexts, like separate from just when they're creating a new issue. You could use it for, I don't know, anything. Anytime they want to do a real-time search by title, you could use that. And that wouldn't require, like, that was probably a tuning of a database query that didn't require any other changes. So I think it's interesting from that point of view. Like if we were to ship a brand new feature with backend, front-end database, design docs, quality, all in one MR, yeah, like it might take a while.
From the MR, that seems to be the idea there, to provide as much context for the maintainer as you can, so that a maintainer could provide you with better feedback and so on. Which I can see the value on the point there, but that does, to me, I think that does add to the response time, so to say, and review time on the MR, especially given the sync, and given that there will be now multiple people having to do review and maintain a review, which have different time zones. So that kind of spans across more time. I don't know if in total it will be more time if you split the MRs into horizontal slices like front end, back end, and even back end changes into multiple smaller MRs. Maybe the way to go is to have these smaller MRs reviewed by the reviewers and then combine all of them into a branch that gathers everything for the maintainers. I don't know what the solution would be, but yeah.
I really think they just want context. Like if you're creating a brand new, what do they call it? We use a non-recommended term for it, so I'm going to try and get away from it. But if you're creating a brand new feature and you need a new table in the database, they don't want to receive the MR with just the new table in the database, because we know it takes a database review and it's going to take longer. They want to see it in context, so they want to see it used. But I don't think that means like we have to do the front end and do the interface and like everything, but rather just if we're creating this, new table, they want to see it in use through the API or something. But if we're just speeding up a query or something, that makes total sense on its own and it doesn't need any other context. That's what I'm taking from the MR anyway.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've read through the commands, and there is debate back and forth, but at least Dylan, who's the author of the MR, seems to be wanting as much context as there is, and he's arguing that combining front end and back end is not a problem, so to say, because then having the whole context will help you rather than having to switch through multiple MRs or just a kind of a brief description of the context might not be as useful. So yeah, it's not like at some point I felt like this turns into a personal preference as well, as there was some mentions as well. But I don't know. I'm just like curious, and I would like to know if we're going to do that. How we're going? Is there something that we can decide at the team level at least? Maybe we can try it. I'm not against trying it, but like my personal feeling is that will not help speed up things. Maybe that will help certain maintainers to get more context, and maybe we can do a better job providing a better description in the MRs, which totally makes sense, providing more context and giving a better understanding on what that specific MR does and why it does it this way, not the other way, which are totally questions that can be asked by the maintainers, I guess, as well while reviewing stuff. So yeah, mixed feelings.
Yeah, I think the hard part with that, anytime we have a combined front end, back end work in a single MR, just throughout the review process, that's at minimum 6 contributors working on the one MR, which is going to just add overhead to the, just the collaboration aspect of it is going to add overhead. I put a comment in here, like as we move more and more away from using our internal API and to using more of the public and GraphQL APIs, the front end is essentially just another consumer. So for backend reviews on API changes, I mean, we should have enough context within the MR or within the issue that we're not really going to need to combine the front end work there. But I mean, I think we're still a ways from there, and I think it was Dylan that was the author of the MR. I'm not sure if on his group they are using like a lot of the backend they are building according to design and front end requests. Okay, we want to move on to the next topic, next point.
Sure. I'll skip the one about the high level question, just something to think about as we look to sort of simplify things and make them, I think, a little bit more extensible. I was thinking about what does it look like if you were to convert an epic into an issue type and have like, eventually we'll want to allow people to name each level of the epic as something, which is sort of the same thing as a type. So we can talk about it later. It's not pressing. Then next one was we're about 80% of the way done with consolidate update for simplify groups and projects. I need to record some videos that kind of more easily convey the problems of folks that haven't been in the weeds with it. And we created a POC where we demonstrated that you can successfully merge a group and a project together into one thing and have like features available. So I created an update issue that we're going to be, once I get done with the videos, and Alex Pooley, who's the engineering lead helping out with this, provides a bit more input. We're going to present this to product leadership to see if we can get it approved. But would love any feedback or input from y'all because it does heavily impact a lot of stuff within our stage. So that's there. If we want to talk about that now, we can, or you can just leave comments on the issue if you have them. Cool. Next thing, the real-time working group has been amazing, and we now have WebSockets live on Canary, and assignees are updating in real time. And I think we're close to being done with working group, which is also amazing. Heinrich also got subscriptions working, and just given like I wanted to raise this in this group meeting, because there are a lot of moving parts right now and a lot of things being refactored and kind of working towards consolidating sidebars and all that good stuff. But like bringing it forefront, like long-term goals, so everyone's aware: real-time boards, real-time issues, epics, MRs, and the ability to open an issue with a board and interact with it. And then hopefully eventually collaborative issue descriptions and whatnot, but that's getting into much more complicated things where we'll have to rewrite the editor. So that's not for now, but I think it is within reach to have real-time issues, epics, MRs, real-time boards, and some of those basic things. So just please keep that in mind when you're considering refactoring stuff and working to make our codes awesome. Any questions about that?
I have a question. It's currently enabled, feature flags enabled for GitLab org and a couple of other projects. Are we aiming to enable it on .com by the end of this milestone?
I'm not the DRI for making that decision because I think it's based on performance impact. So I want to see it defaulted on as quickly as possible. And then the folks in the engineers in the working group can tell me at the rate at which we can do so. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. I'm going to follow up then and figure out who that would be.
I think there's one front-end bug we might also be waiting to fix before doing that. I don't know, John, you're probably more familiar with what that is.
I don't know if we can't, like, we have to rewrite the assignees component basically not to use jQuery, I think that's right, to fix that. So it's sort of like, it's not a bug with WebSockets, it's just legacy tech debt we have to pay down to make it work well. So
yeah, so we'll need that component probably for Epic assignees though as well. Is that right? So it might be
yeah,
yeah, and it's currently being worked on for boards assignees. So it's in the process and it should be done by this milestone. I don't think we have to wait to turn on for .com. Maybe we want to wait till defaulting it on. But personally, I think we can .com it on as is.
it's better than what's there now.
Let's do it. Sounds good.
Who's doing it? who turned it on for GitLab org?
This is like the equivalent of breaking the champagne on the side of the ship. So maybe I'll let Heinrich do it if he's up for it.
Awesome. All right, let's do some demos. Colin, are you on?
Yep, I'll just start by sharing my screen. Okay, so what I'm going to demo today are close buttons on labels. So it's, although it looks like a small change, it's taken a bit of time to get here because first I had to migrate the label sidebar from handle to view. And then there were some issues with the labels themselves with the close button, which I managed to fix, and then had to wait for that to get propagated to GitLab. But now I'm happy that this is now in maintainer review and will be on .com relatively soon, hopefully. So you can hover over the buttons and you get an indication that you can interact with them, click on any, and then it clicks off. And they're also tab accessible as well. So you can tab to a close button, hit enter, and then it removes that button to that label. And that's it. And let me know if you have any comments or questions.
That's awesome. Super exciting.
Yeah, this is a
Really
huge
great.
life change for people who use labels a lot. I mean, the time savings alone just for me is going to be minutes to hours a week. So this is awesome.
Nice. I'll stop sharing then.
I wonder if we will need also a quick rollback or how do you undo action after this.
Yeah, I think somebody mentioned that in the issue or somewhere. I saw a conversation about that, so I think that'll be the next next iteration. We'll figure out what to do there.
I remember Brett had this idea that scope labels should also have like a drop down so that you can just kind of click that and select a different scoped label. Thought that was really cool.
I think there's an issue for that. Because yeah, I've heard that thought mentioned a couple times. Cool. Any other questions on that? All right. I will demo the next one because I don't think Rajat's on or Felipe. No. Okay, so I'll demo this one. All right, this is the add open close configuration to boards. And it's actually not just on swim lanes, it's on both swim lanes and old boards, which is great. Let me go to a board. All right, as you see, we have open and close. I'm gonna edit board. We have these options now, and this is live in production, at least Canary. I think it's production also though. I'm gonna remove these, save it. And open and close is gone. Both sides. Refresh just to confirm that it persists, and it does. And I'm gonna turn it back on just to complete the cycle. And they're back. Woo-hoo. Questions, comments? All right. Nice job, team. Where's my screen? I think it's still March in next.
Yo. So this is less a demo, more of issue-specific discussion. I'm still trying to understand the change that Simon is introducing to burn-up charts, that you're going to be able to press a button. I'm going to share my screen just so it's kind of a demo. There, so that's his screenshot. So we're thinking about the copy for the notification and for the buttons, and I definitely like don't like old and new, like calling it like that, but like I'm trying to understand this.
I can explain the difference between two if you leave your screen up. So because we're using like state events now to render the plot points, if you were to close the milestone and move all the issues that are currently in it out, your burn down chart in the old way, which we can find out a different word for that, the blue line would basically go diagonal straight to the date that it's closed on and show that like all of the issues that were part of that milestone were burned down because they were removed. And so what we're showing here now is like if you were to close it and move all the issues out, your burn down chart line will not change because that's what it was at the time that the milestone closed. So like instead of changing the chart based on the relationships after it's been closed, it will always stay the same and never like be altered depending on what issues you punt into the next milestone or something like that. So I've been using the term historically accurate, but I don't know if there's a better one. And I agree with you with the old and new. There's probably a better way, but I don't know what it is either.
So you would call it historically accurate if it changes, if it goes down to 0 after you take away the issues?
That would be historically inaccurate. Yeah. So because if the milestone ends on September 20th and I have 3 issues that are in that milestone, that it like freezes at that point in time instead of changing it after, like once the milestone's been expired, the data that's in the chart should never change. But right now, or previously, it did change, which led to people believing that the burn down, they actually hit their burn down target when they didn't.
Okay, so so it always updates unless I press new burn down chart, that it becomes immutable, meaning it will never change unless
Yeah, that is only shown when for old milestones that were created before we had the state events. So for new if you like, once this goes live, if you create a new milestone, that old and new thing will never show up. It will only show up if I go to because like milestones created 3 months ago that didn't have the state events won't render burn up charts and won't really render burn down charts the way that they do today. So we almost need a way to give them, instead of like globally changing and making it so the even though it was incorrect the old way we render burn down charts, we want to still make that accessible because it is some form of data. So instead of like making a feature regression and their data disappearing, we need a way to let them switch between the old version that didn't use state events and the new version.
Okay, so I'm gonna think on that, and we'll continue async in the issue or merge request. Thanks.
Okay, looks like we have no more items unless anyone has anything to slip in at the last minute. Going once. Okay, cool. We'll call it there then. Thanks, everyone.